Hey, this is Brian again, and I'd like to ask you to do a favor. We can't do this work without people like you, so if you can, please like, share, subscribe, and tell your friends about Bring Back the Porch.
And I think what we're seeing now is another position where the base has just said, this is enough. We no longer think that the UCP is our home where we can actually make political changes. So we see all these other groups being created. And they're all created from ex-UCP members. And we have the Republican Party of Alberta and it just goes on and on. Because this balkanization of the separatists is because they once felt that they could trust the UCP and the leadership was a bait and switch, get their support, and then change the rules.
This episode of Bring Back the Porch brought to you by Bernie Leahy, River Street Realty. Let's get you home. We keep saying this, that Alberta's politics are getting stranger and stranger, and yet here we are on the cusp of June with Jim Groom. We're talking about even more strange things happening in Alberta politics. Welcome to the porch again, Jim.
Thanks, Brian. Thanks to be here.
Here's the question. Should Alberta remain a province of Canada, or should the government of Alberta commence the legal process required under the Canadian Constitution to hold a binding provincial referendum on whether or not Alberta should separate from Canada? What?
Yes, it's a little bit convoluted.
How do you answer that question?
Well, everybody's saying that it's a two-part question, and you either answer the top or the bottom, and you part A or part B. And that's certainly the only way. Now, when she first initially said that on Thursday night, it was like, well, it's a compound question. How do you answer a compound question with a yes or no answer? You can't. So there's got to be some infrastructure for that. But nobody seems to be making anybody aware of that. And you know what a debacle the municipal elections were with hand counting and the delays. And I talked to people that were 2 hours in line waiting to vote. And some people just said, well, I'm not going to wait anymore. I can't stay here. So this is 10 questions that each one is, if it's all like a paragraph, and if you look at the ones about the court system and the ones about immigration, they're not short either. And unless you've prepared and gone in and said, okay, this is what my answers are going to be, it's going to take everybody like at least 5 minutes to go through them and make a decent choice. And that's going to tie it up. They talk about $50 million being spent on this one. But time-wise, it's going to be difficult. And, of course, if the turnout is really low, then what credibility does that have when people walk away because they're frustrated because they don't want to wait 3 hours to get into a document to sign a vote?
Yeah. She, I think, was trying to make everybody happy, but she made everybody angry.
Yeah. Of course, this is a creation of her own doing. So it's really difficult for her to do what she normally does, is blame whoever else she can. She even wanted to blame Nenshi for the release of the other documents that were found out there. And so she has to live with some of these things. And what I think she tends to do is she goes from the firing pan into the fire a lot because she gets into a difficult situation. And the solution is, well, let's distract by making it even worse. And this is what she's done in this case. She's made it worse. And, of course, her existential threat for her is the party. If the electorate can't do anything about it until 2027, we're stuck. We can't change anything. It's a majority government. It's going to dictate to us for that last year or so. But the party can make a change, and that's where her real fear is. If the party simply wants to pull a Jason Kenney on her, then she is done like dinner if they can get enough support in that. Now, I did hear the president of Rob Smith, the president of the UCP, this morning, as a matter of fact, talking, and he said, no, people have sort of looked at the question again and kind of feel that it's not quite as bad as what they thought originally. But it's not it's not a united party. It's a very divided party, and they have still some old progressive conservatives that are still in there, but it is dominated by the separatist groups and the Take Back Alberta types and, the 1905 committee and, you name it, and they're still involved in all that. So this is the existential threat for her, and that's where her immediate attention has to be. And, of course, she tried to appease them. And every time she tries to appease him, it just gets her in more trouble because she knows the electorate isn't going to support her on that, and yet she's got to appease the party because that's where the immediate threat comes from.
Yeah, David Parker with the group Take Back Alberta, the one who I think was instrumental in getting Jason Kenney elected and then unelected.
Yes, very true.
Said right after the announcement about the referendum question that she has lost her base.
Yes, and I think that's probably fairly accurate. Can she salvage it with, by distraction? Which is very common in politics. You change the focus by making a distraction. And the current distraction this morning was that she's going to reopen the 1982 Constitution and address Indigenous rights and remove Section 35 because it was meant to be in place for all this time. It was supposed to be a short-term thing, according to her position. And that's the argument she's going to take to the Western Premiers Conference today and tomorrow in Kananaskis in order to distract from what she's already done for damages.
Yeah. How did we get to this point? Because there was no mention of this during the last provincial election campaign. It wasn't part of any platforms, and yet here we are.
Bait and switch, in my opinion, is what happened. So Jason Kenney comes in and he vilifies Ottawa, a part that he had been a member of for many, many years, even though mainly in opposition, but not totally. He was a member of the Harper cabinet, of course. And he comes in and he needs to vilify Ottawa, and then he needs to unite his base. So he puts a referendum forward on equalization payments. And 65% of the population say, yes, we don't agree with the way the equalization formula is structured, which was structured under his boss, Stephen Harper. And, of course, it was very generous to Quebec because he was trying to get a majority government, and he needed to get more than the 10 or 11 seats that he had in Quebec, and he was trying to appease them a little bit, and it backfired on them, basically, because Quebec has never bought into Stephen Harper's Conservatives for whatever reason. So Kenney comes forward, and then he simply gets 65% support against equalization, but it's a constitutional entrenched right. He can't do anything about it unilaterally for Albertans. So he says, well, that's done. And the people who thought he was really serious about independence or getting rid of equalization, which is at the core of the separatist movement in many cases, simply said, well, he's not doing the job. He promised us something on equalization, couldn't do it. So Daniel Smith reads the tea leaves, and she looks and she says, what we need is the Sovereignty Act. And she runs for the leadership with the Sovereignty Act. 4 of the other 5 members who ran for the position of leadership in the UCP actually held a press conference saying this is a threat to Canada. This is going to be unconstitutional. It's the worst thing in the world. And then when she won, after the 6th round, they all supported the act when it went to legislature. But it was changed from just Sovereignty Act to the Sovereignty within a United Canada Act. So the separatists in the base once again looked and said, bait and switch. Supported her, we were behind her, we elected her as leader, and then she decides to say a United Canada, a sovereign Alberta in a United Canada, she crossed us. And then she crossed them again when it came to the Bill of Rights. Remember the Bill of Rights and the black hats and Medicine Hat? All get together, and they came up with this very Americanized Bill of Rights, and they put it forward to the government, and the government cut it all out, and all they put in was a little bit for the medical rights with regards to COVID and not being vaccines and things like that. So once again, this base that was mainly sovereigntists were crossed, and they felt, that they had been turned on. And I think what we're seeing now is another position where the base has just said, this is enough. We no longer think that the UCP is our home where we can actually make political changes. So we see all these other groups being created. And they're all created from ex-UCP members. And we have the Republican Party of Alberta and it just goes on and on. Because this balkanization of the separatists is because they once felt that they could trust the UCP and the leadership was a bait and switch, get their support, and then change the rules. And to a certain extent, it's happened to the entire province as well, where it was like, as you say, the 2023 election was about the economy, education, healthcare, maybe a little bit about security. And what do we have now? If you look at the last legislature, the things that they're putting in place, nobody talked about it. Nobody wanted this. Nobody wanted a referendum on independence. None of these things were was it. But the base, she's trying to play both sides towards the minute. She's riding the tiger, and she's about to fall off, and the tiger's going to eat her, which is her base, and it's a hard way to learn, but it's not the first time she's been kicked out of politics, and we'll see how that goes.
How do you see Thomas Kasich playing into this?
Well, Kasich is very articulate and very patriotic, and he talks a good show, you might say, and he's been able to galvanize people behind him. He was a deputy premier before under the Redford regime. I never really cared for him, to tell you the truth, under the Redford regime. I always thought he was a little bit arrogant and a little bit unconnected to the people, and I don't think that anymore. I think he's kind of persuaded me that he's kind of a good representation of that. We see that the Nenshi numbers are very low. Yeah. He's not doing very well. And Alberta is a conservative province no matter what, and it's a bridge too far for some people to vote NDP. They just see it as just not, no matter what the NDP says, a pro-business approach or whatever they want to do, it's not going to win some people over. They just aren't. So maybe some competition from the right side of the spectrum, or the slightly right to the spectrum, might be something that would be helpful. It's not going too well for the progressive,
whatever they are,
that new group, right? Mm-hmm. In fact, they were two members, and now they're down to just one. The former cabinet minister, and that haven't sparked for some reason or other. Yeah. But Kasich may, although he says he has no aspirations for more politics, but he may be recruited by people to say, you are representing us, and we need somebody that we can believe in. And the trouble is to create a new party a year before an election is really difficult, because we're going to have 90 constituencies at the next election, and to get riding associations in each of those and represented. We saw the Alberta Party last election; they could only get 26 candidates, right? And it's really hard to start a new party and find a niche that everybody's going to accept as well.
Do you think people will look over at Jason Kenney and go, that wasn't such a bad leader after all?
Well, the interesting thing about Jason Kenney, he united the left and the right against him. Because by the time they threw him out of his own party, that was done by the people on the extreme left. But the people on the extreme right, I should say, but the people who were more progressive and were still saying, yeah, Jason Kenney, he's not the guy, and the legitimacy of his elections were questioned at both stages, and then, of course, the provincial election wasn't, but his leadership races were, the kamikaze candidate thing came in, and there was just bad blood there for sure. And, of course, he did get 51% of the vote. He could have stayed, but he chose not to. Probably, well, as you say, you look back and you think, geez, maybe it would have been better with a Jason Kenney. He would have been more pragmatic, but I think his caucus was done with him as well. So he united everybody against him, and it just went downhill.
One person that I was thinking this morning has been very noticeably quiet, at least in my mind, is Brian Jean.
Yeah, well, I think Brian's, the old Peter principle. Mm-hmm. You raise to your own level of incompetence. Mm-hmm. I think Brian was probably at his peak as a cabinet minister and following the orders of Premier Smith. It's he's had his personal issues with health for his family and things like that, which probably distracted him somewhat, especially during the runoff for the leadership of the UCP. But I've seen him in various debates, and it's hard to kind of come away impressed with his position on things, in my opinion, anyway.
We also saw the leak of voters lists. through this process, which has never happened before, at least to my knowledge.
No, I've never heard of it either.
And I don't know what the fallout from that is going to be.
Well, ironically, of course, the Premier stood up in the House or in the legislature and said, we're not going to proceed with anything until the investigations are done. Elections Canada, RCMP, even the Ethics Commissioner was doing an investigation. And then Thursday night, she announces, no, we're going to actually have a referendum, which is kind of related because the question was the 300,000 signatures that the Free Alberta group got, Strong and Free group, were always in question because how legitimate was it? And Elections Alberta was never able to go through and check the names because the court ruling got in there, right? So the Premier in her Thursday night address said there's 100,000 people who want a referendum, which is not the case at all. And we don't know about the 300,000, how legitimate those 300,000 is because the voters list was out. And I did see a text from Rath who said, if you want to be a hero for the movement, here's the list. Maybe go and get a whole bunch of signatures or perhaps not get signatures, but perhaps you do. And I mean, they always claimed that they were going to have large numbers, and they did have lots of people lined up, but they only had few actual sessions, so it made it look like it was a lot of people. So it becomes an issue of, well, did they get that support, or is that 300,000 just being bandied about without any really substantiation of it?
Yeah. A lot of people might be thinking, well, let's have the vote and put this to bed. But it doesn't happen that way. We've seen 2 votes in Quebec, and there might be a third coming. Let's pause for a moment so we can share some exciting news. We're proud to announce that our work here at Bring Back the Porch is getting noticed. From October to the end of January, our videos and reels viewed more than 1 million times. Some of those viewers could be your customers, so sponsoring Bring Back the Porch is a great way to get your message in front of them too. If you'd like to support our work here at Bring Back the Porch, we ask you to go to our website at bringbacktheporch.com and follow the links. Thank you for your support.
Yeah, there are a lot of folks in the media are quoting René Lévesque where he said, well, we didn't win this time, it was only 40-60 back in 1980, but we'll get them next time. And yeah, 95, there was only 1% difference between the two. And Parizeau stood up and said it was the Anglos and the immigrants that are the problem. It sounds a little bit familiar that blaming immigrants is kind of an escape clause for some politicians because it's an easy target. They can't really defend themselves all that well, even though they're paying taxes, etc. So it does become an issue. The other thing, of course, is that the courts struck down the appeal from the Strong and Free Alberta. But it still has to be appealed, and it's even being appealed by the government as well as by the Strong and Free Alberta. So if the Superior Court, the Supreme Court, the Alberta Court of Appeal decides that it is constitutional, that they could do it, or the Supreme Court of Canada decides that, well, what does that mean? Do they then present and now go through the process that they had before? Because they were still promised under the legislation that if it had enough signatures, they would bring it forward to a referendum. So they didn't bring that one forward to the referendum. They brought a whole different referendum question forward, as we've just talked about. So all of a sudden that group could then say, well, now the courts are in our favor. Let's go back to the drawing board and have this with our question, which was drawn from the Clarity Act, which I'll give them credit for that. And let's ask that question because it's not the same question that you asked. So we may be doing referendums every year for the next perceivable future. And I guess that's what direct democracy, in some people's opinions, is all about. I don't particularly see that as a good idea, but.
Another sidebar to all of this, too, is a long-held complaint from conservatives about judge-made law. People who are not elected making the law.
Yeah. this goes back to parliamentary supremacy, which was sort of overthrown in 1982 when Canada finally came to realize that we needed three branches of government for checks and balances. And although the legislative branch and the executive branch are fused in the parliamentary system, it still needs a third branch to be independent, and that's the judiciary. And every poll that they've done on the value of the judiciary always says that people have more faith in the judiciary than they do in a politician, and so it's held us in good stead. And I think being able to have the Constitution, 1982, and the Charter of Rights and Freedoms, and the interpretation has to be done by the judiciary, and it's been pretty solid. When the teachers were sent back to cancel their strike, it contradicted the rules of the Supreme Court, who said everybody has a right to certain job actions in the country. And, they invoked the notwithstanding clause, and 51,000 teachers had their rights removed. It's just as simple as that, And this government might like to say that the notwithstanding clause is constitutional because it's in the Constitution, but it's an override of the Constitution. It violates the Constitution, and you can't pretend that it doesn't violate the Constitution. That's how it's written, and it has to be Section 2 or 7 to 15, and that's the only ones that apply. And of course, we have the Premier in the legislature again saying, well, we're going to invoke the notwithstanding clause to make sure that we can have this referendum. And it had to be pointed out to her that 35, with his Indigenous rights, does not fall under Section 2 or 7 to 15, nor is it part of the Charter of Rights and Freedoms. It's the part of the Constitution Act of 1982, but it's not part of the rights and freedoms. It ends at 34 for the rights and freedoms. So things that she should kind of be aware of. But then, early on she thought she was like a governor in a state, and she could declare certain convicted criminals free to go,
Yeah. The other strange thing that happened last week before the referendum question was put on the ballot was a committee was meeting to look at the strong and free petition.
Yes.
And a press release came out that they had made had agreed to put it on the ballot before the committee had even met, which was like a oops.
Well, that was the free or Stay with Canada petition they were looking at, right?
Lukasik.
Yes, Lukasik's one. And it was interesting because Lukasik wanted to testify or at least present before that committee, and they said, no, we don't need you. The committee had been formed in December. They didn't have their first meeting till April, and it was a perfunctory meeting, and they said, well, we don't need anybody to testify at this point, and we'll have another. And all of a sudden, they become, engaged with this, and they call it Lukasik, and exactly. They put out a press release before the actual vote, which, I guess in a way, when you have a committee that's 4 UCP members to 2 NDP members, you kind of know how the vote's going to go, and it's all predetermined. But it is really unfortunate to see that kind of an error go forward, because it gives us even less faith in our politics when we look and we say, well, so these people who sit and listen to people and have hearings, really it's all predetermined? And the answer is yes, it is, basically.
There was another committee, the Electoral Boundaries Committee, chaired by Dallas Miller here in Medicine Hat, and they came up with a recommendation, and there was a minority report on that. They were not united.
But in Section 9 of the Alberta Boundaries Elections Act says that the majority report will be taken as gospel, sort of thing, and it will be acted upon. Now, what the government has done is they said, but there's a section where only the commissioner decided that there should be 90 instead of 89. It should be 91, I guess it is, right?
Two more, yeah.
Two more, yeah. And it was only him that said that. And they jumped on that and said, well, see, we can't act on this because the commissioner is against it. But the majority report had the 3 members, the 2 from the NDP support kind of members and the commissioner all said that the boundaries should look like this, and they gave the maps, and it was the urban boundaries, etc. They had a united report that they presented in October. So they present that report to the Speaker of the House, right, Rick McIver, and he reads, and it's unanimous, and they are going by the basically urban ridings versus rural ridings to a large extent. Mm-hmm. In that report, there was 3 hybrid ridings that were recommended around Calgary. The next report comes out, and there's 11 hybrid ridings around Calgary. And in the interim, so they do the interim report, they're sent back to do more inquiries, they do another, 20 interviews. Members of the UCP, MLAs, went to address each of those the sessions about their own ridings. So these are the people running in those ridings that are currently representing those ridings, and they're now determining, or at least suggesting, that they should have input as to how their riding should be structured. And Nicolaitis is one of the ones in this regard. Calgary Bow, I think it is, if I'm not mistaken. And his riding had been an urban Calgary riding. And he won by a little over 600 votes. He looks at that and he goes and represents, and he says he needs rural representation in his riding. And he has this big swoop that goes out towards Kananaskis and Canmore, and he says that's where I should have, which gives him more rural voters. And we know that traditionally rural voters tend to vote more conservatively than the urban voters. So that 600 votes that he won by, 630, I think it really was, suddenly could be expanded for him. He could get many more because he's got more voters out there. Lethbridge is a terrible situation. Of course, Lethbridge West is an NDP riding, and it has been for a long time, for quite a time, yeah. And it's never been an overwhelming riding by any means, but it has been good representation. So the UCP member from Calgary East goes and he says, what we should do is have it spread into 4 ridings. And Calgary or Lethbridge will be the epicenter, and then they'll spread out like quadrants around the city, and then we'll have big rural ridings and just a little bit of the city in it. So who's that going to benefit? It's going to benefit the UCP. And in fact, in the by-election that they had in Lethbridge West that was won by the NDP, the loser apparently went and said to the winner, he says, well, that's okay, because in the next one, we're going to have 4 ridings in Lethbridge, and I'll win because it's going to be greater rural representation. And that was that was 3 years ago, I think, the by-election. And so that was long before the structure of the Boundaries Commission had even been set up. And so they were already plotting that way. I went to the Brooks Medicine Hat riding hearing for that, and we had a representative here from Medicine Hat went because they have some input, and they were talking about the value of hybrid ridings. And I thought, well, that was kind of a strange thing. Why would he be doing that? Because we already are a hybrid riding in both cases. But this was the design of the UCP to say no more rural versus urban. We're going to blend them all as hybrids as much as we can because it's going to benefit us as a party. And there's been some stats done that it's going to cut down the NDP MPs by anywhere from 10 to 15 as far as numbers are concerned. So they'll never be government if that goes through. This, to me, is one of the biggest existential threats to democracy in Alberta, is when the people who are being elected determine how the structure of the system is. And at one point when I went to this meeting in Brooks, I thought there's 5 members of respected members of the Alberta community. They're independent. They're led by a judge. And I thought this is really democracy in action. And then we see that between the interim report where, no, it's all unanimous, to the final report where there's a minority and a majority, and the government selectively says, we're going to ignore Section 9, we're simply going to say that the commissioner couldn't decide, and we're going to create our own committee. which is the most undemocratic thing that's happened in Alberta in a while, I think.
Well, all this has been going on. It hasn't been quiet in Ottawa either. Mark
True.
Carney now has a majority government.
Yes, by hook or by crook.
By hook or by crook. A lot of squeals from the opposition about floor crossing, and yet they had the opportunity once upon a time to set legislation that would have maybe prevented that from happening, and they didn't support it.
Yeah, the parliamentary system, that's how it works, and it always worked this way. It probably always will, because the party that's trying to get that majority is the government, and so they have the majority after they get that, and they're not going to change it at all. And it's gone on for years, and back and forth. There's both sides have benefited from it, and what is typical, though, of course, is the person that floor crosses almost always never gets reelected.
Yeah.
It's
a price.
Yes, it's just the way it is. Yeah.
We have seen, though, Alberta and Ottawa get together on a possible pipeline deal, and now we hear that Mr. Carney has letters from 14 of his MPs worrying about whether or not he's giving away too much on the environment.
You have to be really cautious here, because Guilbeault, was the Quebec lieutenant when he was still in cabinet, really does represent a part of Quebec that is very conscious about the environment. There is a portion in Quebec that are strong environmentalists, and they support the Liberals because there's the Bloc, that has its challenges as well, right? But they support the Liberals, and Carney doesn't want to put that in jeopardy. I think he's got about 48 Liberal MPs from Quebec right now, and the Bloc has a fair number as well. But he can't. There's 78 seats in Quebec. He needs to still maintain that. And when you think of it, there's 38 seats in Alberta, but only 3 of them right now are Liberals. If he's throwing away a chance to get 78 seats in Quebec, as opposed to increasing his numbers, they're never going to have popularity in Alberta. There's just no doubt that they're never going to have a majority of electorates here. So from a political standpoint, uniting the country, I think it's answering some of the questions that Alberta has, but is it at his own deficit, and that he's not really a politician per se, and I'm not sure how much his advisors are helping him on this in some cases. He says some things that you think they should have preempted some of the things that he said. But anyway, it is a challenge here. And too much to Daniel Smith's chagrin, of course, you remember when at the AGM, for the UCP AGM, he stood up and said, well, Canada is working, and as proof, we have the MOU, and she was booed. Yeah. And so there is that group that are very proactive in the UCP. They attend the AGMs. They are religious about that. They vote religiously, etc., and they have a predetermined aspect that they are never going to be pro-Ottawa. There's just no way. And so no matter what, you can't appease that group, I don't think.
And on the left coast, the west coast, you have another premier who's going, wait a minute, you can't do this.
Absolutely. And, you have to kind of think that Ebbie has some points in some regards, because he wasn't even consulted before the MOU, and it's going to go across BC. Now, anytime there's interprovincial trade or interprovincial crossings, the federal government literally has the right to do that from the Constitution. But you have to remember that you don't want to tick off all your premiers, because they get together and they gang up on you. And we saw this with Mr. Harper. He didn't have any constitutional conferences, or maybe one, during his 10 years in power, because the provinces were at that point NDP and Liberals, and also didn't care for his approach, his a little bit heavy-handed approach. So you have to keep peace within those premiers, because if you don't, they will come back to haunt you as well.
Well, from political theater in Edmonton and Ottawa, Medicine Hat has been relatively quiet.
It's so nice, isn't it? Mm-hmm. It is relatively quiet, and they are doing the nuts and bolts that they have to do, the hands-on things. One of the things that's changed, though, in this legislature is they changed the relationship between the province and the municipal governments even more than they've already done. I want to say Bill 28, but I'm not sure if that's the number. And it is taking even more power away from municipalities. They're not aiming at Medicine Hat, of course. They're aiming at Calgary and Edmonton, but they are aiming at the municipalities generally. And they're not giving us any more money, but they're giving us more duties and minute things that have to be done under the provincial control, though they want to direct everything. And so I'm not sure that will impact too badly on Medicine Hat, but it will certainly have some impact. But I think Medicine Hat's been relatively quiet, like you say. There's probably some behind-the-scenes machinations going on that we don't know about, but we still have yet to find a lot of new industry or something that's going to boo our economy up too much. And there's got to be stuff out there that we should be beating the bushes to find, but you know, what's that going to be? Right?
Yeah, I did pay attention to Councillor Bill Cox when he was taking administration to task for what he perceived was foot dragging over the 800% increase in liquor store business fees.
Yeah, and they were kind of a niche issue, but it's good that that's what he's about. It's supposed to represent the population. There's been a few things with utility bills downtown in particular that have hit.
Michael Reid,
Yeah, they've struck some companies really badly, and I'm hoping, I think we all hope that there's enough hands-on at a municipal level where somebody from the administration can simply go out and say, "Oh, what's the problem? We didn't realize we were creating such an issue for you. Let's repair that." But yeah, it had to go to Bill in order to do that, and good for him. Mm-hmm. Yeah, that's what it's there for, is to help the small businesses, and it seems like when you put the numbers together, it seems sort of small, but it's not to those companies because that's their lifeline, and that can make the difference between solvency or bankruptcy.
And jobs or no jobs for some people.
And jobs or no jobs, exactly. Yeah. And that's they say it's the lifeblood of the economy is the small businesses, and it doesn't take you long to drive around Medicine Hat and see empty buildings where those small businesses didn't make it. So anything we could do to make it better for them, I applaud.
Yeah. And there is a group, too, that are getting themselves organized, at least on social media. They are very vocal in opposition to any changes to 3rd Street Northwest in Riverside.
Yeah, I've been reading a little bit about some of those reports, and to the credit of the administration, the municipal administration, they have taken it to heart. The first and second public meetings, they said we don't want a whole bunch of
bump outs.
Bubbles, yeah. And so they did cut it down to significant numbers. You know, when you're sitting at a drafting table and you're doing the planning, it looks so nice to have these, and just a couple of pedestrians, and, there's a car parked there, but there's no. But when it gets to reality, that street is lined with parked cars all day, every day, and those businesses depend on that. And if you start to put a bunch of restrictions in there so that you can have bike lanes or walking paths that are, like humongous, and we've learned that from the Northwest Hill and the issue that went on up through there, and it's I think they're learning from that. But
And the perception among those people who are opposed to it is that City Hall isn't listening. The administration is telling City Council what to do, that the tail is wagging the dog.
Yes. There's always that conflict. And, of course, in the last administration, there was this idea that the administration really was telling Council what to do and how to do it, et cetera, et cetera. And I don't think that's a legitimate complaint anymore. There's going to be times when it is, but I think in a general sense that Council has got a grip, and they've been able to ameliorate some of the conflict a little bit because they recognize that people are watching and seeing how they're doing, and they don't want to have a situation like they did in the past, and I think they're trying their best to play that diplomatic role that they have to do a little bit.
Always a pleasure to speak with Jim Groom about political
Brian.
matters, and I'm sure we'll be visiting again soon.
Thanks very much, Brian. Nice to be here.
Hey, this is Brian again, and I'd like to ask you to do a favor. We can't do this work without people like you, so if you can, please like, share, subscribe, and tell your friends about Bring Back the Porch.